you want to do the roll call, Kiana? Or I guess I'll introduce, sorry. This is the Community Economic Development Committee, November 18th, 2021. Kiana, can you do the roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Welton?
Here.
Ms. Allard?
She is excused.
Ms. Kennedy?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Mr. Constant?
He's
Mr.
listening with one ear.
Okay, Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Mr. Dunbar? Ms. LaFrance? Mr. Perez-Verdia? Ms. Quinn Davidson? Ms. Dolatel? Chair, you have a quorum.
All right, thank you. So Chris has stepped out, but he would like to add to the agenda the first look at an ordinance that would allow a marijuana potency to match what the state somewhat recently changed. But he stepped out briefly, so I'd like to add that if there's no objections. Hearing none, we'll add that. And then 2A regarding bad habits cultivation, we'll address that at our next meeting. That was, it's not on for our Tuesday meeting, and we weren't quite ready. We didn't send out the information on that. So there's nothing really to address. So if there's anyone in the audience on that one, we'll hit that at our next meeting, which I think is December 2nd. And then, so anyway, any thoughts on that from the committee? Okay, so we'll take that off the agenda. And then under ongoing business, we have listed 3B, C, and D, discussion of cottage food requirements, food permit fees, and permitting small-scale commercial agriculture uses. And those are ongoing, but we are not intended to address those in this meeting. Unless, is there someone here from the health department or otherwise that was ready to address something there? Chime in if you are. Okay, I don't hear that. So for the committee, we'll those are ongoing issues, but I think the Anchorage Community Land Trust with Kirk Rose and his team are working with the health department right now to come up with something that they'll bring to us later. So at this point, we've got the issue on the land assessments in 3A. And I wanted briefly to let Jack Adamus just give us an update on where the switch with the CAMA. We've got a new program that's being worked on it. He talked about a couple months ago. Get an update on where we are with that. And then I've invited Ian Moore to do a presentation that goes through a presentation that Mr. Gadamas did back in June or July. And he's got some points with that he will highlight, and then invited Jack here to address some of those things that Ian will be bringing up. So I think it's a little unusual sometimes to bring in someone like that, but Ian's been working on this quite closely, and it's kind of an area of expertise for him. And talked to Jack yesterday, and he's got a copy of it and should be able to address some of those issues. So with that, Jack, can you give us an update on the CAMA, the new CAMA program?
Yeah, so not a huge update with everything. We are moving along with the system. We're starting to we're starting to get very we're honing in on the values matching our current CAMA system, and for those, and maybe for the record too, again, my name is Jack Adamus. I'm the municipal assessor. So we're getting closer to that. CAMA is the computer assisted mass appraisal system that we use. It's pretty old right now. It's was implemented in Anchorage in 1980 something, early 80s. So we're making a lot of progress on that. We're looking to go live with the new system in next year, early next year for real property. And so one of the questions that have been coming up is what with the new system what are we going to get from that? What kind of additional transparency will there be? So right now, the constraints with our current system is that we're not able to put land features up on the website. So for example, if I go online, I'm not able to say, does my property have a well or not a well? In the new system, that will happen. We will be able to put and publish online, what kind of physical attributes does your land have? Very similar to how we publish right now, the characteristics of the property, if it has, what the size of the building is, for example, square footage and so forth. That will, so like I said, we're going to be going live with the system early next year. So what that means is that the tax year 2022 values, they'll be, we're getting very close. They'll be calculated and based out of the legacy system. So we probably won't be seeing these land features or attributes until the following tax year 2023 is, I'm guessing, when we'll be able to see those be calculated in the new system and then be published online in the new system. So there's going to be a little bit of a lag between everything, but that's my guess. It may happen earlier than that, but for cautionary purposes, I think it's safe to say that would be 2023. So hopefully that gives maybe an update with everybody as far as where we're at with respect to the transparency of everything.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Any questions from the committee? I'm watching the chat, so if you want to get in, go ahead and put a little Q in there. Jack, we're in the budget season now. Do you have the budget for the staff to make this happen?
For the budget for the staff, it's going to be probably more for this focusing, solely on this. So just narrowly constraining it, focusing on the budget for just the purposes of this particular question for the land characteristics. I think it's going to be probably more a function of working with the vendor and working with IT to be able to post it online. So I think we certainly will be able to have that moving forward for this.
Okay, good. So we're set up to move forward on that. So what I'd like to do, unless you have anything to add, Jack, or you?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we're here. We're excited to try to have the new system to offer more capability. As we move forward with the new system. So we are excited with that, and I think if anything, it's not going to be just a light switch where we go into the new system and then everything's available and everybody knows how to use every little crook and cranny of the system. It's obviously going to take some time for us to continue to understand and learn the system, ramp it up, have that stabilization period. We're still going to have modules bolt on as we, several months after we go officially live. So just kind of maybe wanted to let everybody know that it's not just a light switch too.
Okay, good. Thanks. And just Jack had given me links to, I think, half a dozen cities that use the new system, and I went through those recently, and it's a much easier system to use. And every city presented a little bit different information, but it was pretty clear that for any piece of property, there could be an extensive list of features shown, and it also was an easy click to get a like an aerial photo of it and so on. So. And then tax history and so on. And even several of them had, sales history for the specific property and notes on whether they were, arm's length or not. So it was really pretty interesting, a step far ahead of where we are. So Pete, I see you in the queue. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Jack, I was wondering, so do you have training plan for the employees? If when we buy this system, do they come in as part of the deal, train our employees, or how's that work with this?
Yeah, that's a huge, great question, and I would say that without having the personnel without having our staff embrace the new technology, the project would not go. And so we have been working with as best as we can, I mean, given there's constraints. But yes, we will be doing training. That'll be happening in December, January. It's gonna be where we're gonna be focusing on some of the training, and so that'll give us a base for the training. And then obviously that there's going to be additional training as you just need to literally learn and grow with the system as well.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks, Pete. And just for note, Wisconsin is back with us as of 9/11-ish. Okay, so I want to move now then to Ian Moore. Ian, are you on with us?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect.
And I don't know what's easiest, Kiana, if you can, do you give permission so Ian can share his presentation, or would that work best, Ian?
Sure, that would be great.
Yes, he should be able to share. He has permission.
Okay, let me try here.
And just to introduce this, again, we had a presentation from Jack a few months ago, early summer, and there were some points in there that Ian thought were kind of worth looking at a little bit more closely. So his presentation will kind of highlight those. So go ahead, Ian, and if you have questions, go ahead and put it in the queue, and we've got time, when Jack can address some of these points as we hit them. Thanks. Go ahead, Ian.
Thank you, John, for inviting me. Can everybody see my screen now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, and so what I'm hoping to do here is just present a few slides that are in response to a presentation that was done back in July. And in that presentation, the assessor came and described the process that they go through to assess land in Anchorage. And on the surface, everything sounded quite reasonable. And I think the process, kind of the underlying process that they described, really makes sense from an assessment standpoint. But I think it's important to dig into the details and just make sure that the details of the way assessments are being generated are going as smoothly as the process that he described. And so the first element that he discussed for assigning valuation to land is deriving a base value for the property. And this, as he described it, is based on taking their database of sales and trying to fit a trend line through that, comparing sale price to lot size. And so this is simply correlating lot size to sale price. And they presented a graph here showing a nice curve. Unfortunately, it sounds like the underlying data that was used to generate this line isn't available and isn't transparent. So we can't see how well this actually fits the data. But I guess as he described it, this kind of makes sense, where you see diminishing returns, where as the lot size goes up, the incremental additional value for for the land goes down, and it's a nice smooth line. And as you pointed out, each point on this line, so there are 4 different blue points on the graph, and each point of those is described in a separate model in the mass assessment database. And so they showed us the data out of the database that describes how those 4 different models work. And each one is defined by the coordinates, the size and value for the beginning of that model, and then a slope for the incremental cost for land prices as the lot size goes up. But if we look at it, the data here that they're actually using for generating assessments, there's some discrepancies that I guess we have to hope are just typos. Here you can see between the first leg and the second leg, there's a almost $50,000 jump. And so this is a discontinuity in the graph where you've got one leg that is going up at a very gentle slope and it doesn't meet the next point in the graph. And then the other thing that I want to point out here is at the third leg, it's showing an incredible rise in incremental value. And so instead of this picture that they were describing of decreasing incremental value as lot size increases, it's showing that beyond 60 acres, all of a sudden that each additional square foot of land is making a much larger difference in lot size, which is a pretty different story from what was presented. So if we go back and look at the graph, here's the graph again, you can see the 4 points. The first leg using the data of the table kind of matches the graph. It's a straight line, not a curve, but that's a linear model. The second leg you can see deviates wildly from the graph that they presented. And so here, this is going up at the angle that was described in the table. You see the third leg kind of matches the graph, and then the fourth leg shoots up at an angle. So we have to hope that these were just typos that were entered into the database. Unfortunately, at this point, none of the data is transparent. And so although this information is being used to value and has been used to value land all over Anchorage, nobody had the ability to do this type of audits until his presentation that he did for you in July. And so there hasn't been any opportunity to fix errors like this. Any questions so far? Okay, so I'll go on. Okay, again, each point in this again is a separate model, and so there's a group of properties that fall between those size ranges that are being assessed. The base value is defined using each of these 4 models. So in that July presentation, the presenter selected just an example of property which is on the hillside to just go through the details of how you take that base value and then you make adjustments to it based on different land parameters. And so I'm just going to go through this same example that he came up with. This is a approximately 40-acre parcel. It was a part of a native allotment that's been the BLM is acting as a custodian for the native landowner. If you look at the parcel detail page, this is the information that's available currently from the municipality. The only information about the land right now made available is the lot size and the zoning. You can see I've got those 2 underlined. One other thing I want to point out on this page is that this land is valued with a building, and the information here says it's a cabin that was built in 1960 in poor condition. It's about 400 square feet, so that's about 20 by 20. And in 2020, it was valued at $5,000. Somehow in 2021, they've decided that building has 0 value. But I think the interesting thing we want to look at here is that you can see on the aerial photograph that there is no building on this property. And it's pretty clear that what happened is that the assessor found this building on the adjacent property and has mistakenly placed it on this property. And so that in the assessment, it looks like that adjacent property isn't being assessed with the building, and this one is. So this is just the kind of thing that it's really hard for members of the public to identify, and mistakes like this get perpetuated in the valuation system. So the bulk of the presentation back in July was about influences to value. And this is taking parameters that more specifically describe each parcel and looking at them and how they adjust that base value that was created from that initial graph that we looked at and make adjustments. And so here you can see how this property, the areas in green are where the assessor has gone through. No, in red is where the assessor has made adjustments to the defaults to adjust the value of the property. So let's just look in detail at a few of those. The first one I want to look at is topo, and here's an excerpt from the assessor's office residential assessment manual that describes the categorizations that they use for valuing topography, slope essentially. And it's a little bit confusing here because it appears that they are confusing two different units of slope. In part of the description, it talks about degree slope, and down lower, it's pretty clear that based on the formula that they're recommending for calculating slope, that actually they mean percent slope. Percent slope is, as you all know, is what's used throughout municipal code for in zoning for determining minimum lot size for some of the variable lot size zoning districts. It's used for determining maximum grade for roads and developable portions of properties for septic areas. So I think we have to assume that they mean slope, they mean percent slope, even though the units are pretty different here. And as you know, percent slope and degree slope are really different units. And so getting from the degree slope, the percent slope is essentially the tangent. And so if you have a 45-degree slope, that would correspond to 100% slope, but it's not a linear difference. But let's look at this particular property. If we look at the details, the calculated average slope of this parcel is 52.4%. It's one of the steepest properties in all of Anchorage. And yet somehow in the assessment database, it's categorized as hillside, so not that steep category. The hillside slope is slope between 10 degrees and 25 degrees, but I calculated that almost 97% of this parcel has slopes greater than 25%. And so it's just wildly miscategorized, and that's had a real significant impact on the valuation that's been assigned to the property. We go on, in that original table, the access to this property is categorized as poor. From the residential assessment manual, that indicates the property is accessible by vehicles over poor roads. Looking again at this extract from the municipal parcel mapping, you can see that there are no roads that abut this property. And in fact, there are no easements that would provide access. So this pretty clearly falls in that first category of no access. The property is landlocked with no legal access. Again, it's a little bit confusing because it's a piece of a native allotment where the native allotment originally included some additional adjacent properties, but those are valued differently by the assessor. And again, if you look at that initial graph that was used for calculating the base rate, each of these smaller parcels is valued as being a small parcel, not a large parcel. And so they're not getting the benefit of that diminishing returns for incremental addition size. And so given that we're valuing them that way, we have to value them as separate individual parcels. And pretty clearly the access is incorrectly valued on this one. We go on and look at the third categorization was used, the view for the property. Again, from the residential assessment manual used by the MOA Assessor's Office, there are 5 different categories that are typically used for categorizing view. And view is kind of a problematic metric because, of course, it's a little bit subjective. but here they've got pretty specific guidelines for each of these categories. And in the presentation, you showed that this property is categorized as having an excellent view. Whereas if you look at this photograph taken from a site on the property, you can see that it's got a hugely panoramic view, seeing essentially 360 degrees from a knoll above tree line. And I guess the challenge here is that it's a large property, it's 40 acres, and it's pretty subjective about where you evaluate the view on a property. And in the assessment manual, it's clear that once a building exists on a property, you should evaluate the view from the location of that building. But here, since there is no building, you have to look at where you could build on this property. And again, that's hard because it's all really steep. And I guess in my mind, it seems pretty unlikely that it's going to be built on. But this is from one of the few flatter sites near the top of the property. It's, again, there's only 3% of the property that's less than 25%. And this is one little corner that fell in that. And again, you can see that there's this huge, almost in this photograph, 180-degree view out over the inlet. So again, looking at the original table of influences to value, you can see that the view was pretty badly miscategorized. The topography was miscategorized, and the access was miscategorized. And so that just throws into question the whole valuation of the property. So when we look closely, it seems that many of the details from that first presentation were apparently in error. There was the significant errors in the base value table, the incorrect view categorization, the incorrect slope categorization, the incorrect access categorization, and it was assessed for a building that isn't even on the parcel. But unfortunately, since this data isn't publicly available, we, the assembly, the public, anybody, has no way to see how widespread these problems are. So what can the assembly do? I think the easiest step is to insist on transparency and immediately make all of this assessment data available to the public. And I know that several community councils in the last 6 months have made public information requests for this specific data, and the assessors responded that the estimated cost would be between $1,000 and $1,500. And for a community council with no assets, that's a huge amount of money. But in terms of the municipal budget, that's the smallest drop in the bucket. And it seems like that would be a no-brainer decision to spend the $1,500 or whatever it's going to take in staff time to make this data available now, instead of waiting until 2023 or later when it might be available with a new system that doesn't exist. The next kind of logical step would be for the assembly to commission a more formal audit of the categorizations and adjustments that are being used for land valuations. And looking at this example and the few other examples that we've seen in the research, or that I've seen in the research that I've done, it seems like these types of errors are pretty widespread and prevalent, and that there are many properties that are being incorrectly valued because of these incorrect adjustments that are being made. And so I think that might be a really useful thing for the assembly to do a formal audit, but unfortunately that's going to take time, and that would add some expense. Beyond just transparency, I think the next step is figuring out a way that these issues can be corrected. And right now, municipal code only allows landowners to challenge the valuation of their own property. And so if a property is being misvalued, either overvalued or undervalued, but the landowner doesn't have the time or the interest in challenging that valuation, it isn't going to get fixed. And like in this example, the BLM is acting as that's a custodian for the native allotment there, but it seems like in the 50 years or 60 years that native allotments existed, there hasn't been very much activity. There's never been a sale of the property, and so it's hard to know what the value is, and it looks like they haven't made any challenge with that valuation. And I guess the last point here that I have is the Assembly should certainly fix municipal code so that people who are appealing valuations have the opportunity to present evidence that would rebut these types of mistakes. And currently there's municipal code allows a very short window at the beginning of the year when all evidence has to be presented about that would support the valuation of the appeal for the valuation of a property. But it's only multiple months after that that the municipality would provide this type of detailed information about the way that they value the property. And it seems like certainly there should be a formal opportunity for evidence to be presented that rebuts these types of mistakes. So again, here's four points that seem like they're pretty easy opportunities for the Assembly to make a real difference. And I would welcome any questions.
All right, thanks, Ian. I think first let's go to Jack. Can you comment on the various points?
Yeah, so I appreciate this, and Ian, we've been working with him on several issues. He's actually been very diligent in pointing out some of the confusion and or potential errors that we've had. So things like, for example, he was pointing out the slope where we were confusing two different, basically confusing two different words, the jargon, so to speak, very, technically important. And we have been working, View is another one. We've been working with Ian on that to refine and better our manual, which is our internal manual for guidance on how to systematically assess properties and to categorize them. So there's been some great progress from Ian to help us with that process. So I would say that's the first thing, that these points that he's raising can really help us make the process better. I was looking. I did have a little time looking at this presentation early this morning, and so there's a couple points. I think maybe the first one, when he's talking about the calculating the base value with the spreadsheet. I was looking at that, and I'll put it on me for this. I actually grabbed basically a snippet back in the summer when I made this presentation, and it's a snippet from our Excel spreadsheet, and it's used to help us calibrate the models, but it isn't necessarily updated to what is reflected in our CAMA system. And so we looked into it this morning, and sure enough, the Excel spreadsheet snippet in this presentation was not reflecting some of the issues that Ian has pointed out. So all that to basically say is that yeah, what he's seeing doesn't make sense. We did look in our system, and the minimum or the values, the curves are in effect correct. I mean, I don't know if Ian, you want to maybe go to that slide so we can talk to the Assembly and the rest, and this might help too. Yeah, maybe that one more up there. I got it. Yeah, thanks, Ian. So yeah, the minimum value there, that's not a calculated field in the Excel spreadsheet, and then so it is actually a smooth curve. Unlike what you're showing here, Ian, you're correct mathematically, that would not make sense. And then also that third leg there, that 10 cents is actually not 10 cents. It's less than that. It still follows that diminishing returns. So the whole point of when I grabbed this back in the day was to show more the concepts of how the values are created. And I do apologize for any confusion there to Ian and anybody else. So I think that was the other one. As far as the subject goes, we actually, the subject actually is a government-owned property. And we picked this property because it was specifically government-owned. There's actually not a ton of large tracts that are government-owned property, but we want to be respectful to landowners and not pick on a particular landowner of property and use that landowner's property as an example on things, and put it under a microscope, so to speak. So with respect to government properties, I mean, I'm looking at that property. Maybe there's not, as Ian pointed out, maybe there's not a cabin on it. We probably need to go out there again, which I think if anything paints the picture that we do need to get to properties every 6 years. That is absolutely critical. It does help with ensuring that we have accurate values. The profiles are correct. And as Ian's pointing out, there could be an issue where we confused the cabin there, maybe on the property to the north of that. They're owned by the same landowner, the government property. So we could have confused that in that reinventory at some point in time. So that could be the case, but again, the importance is to make sure that we're out there, we're ensuring that things are accurate, and if anything, having the resources to go to properties. In general, we focus on taxable property and put less priority on these government exempt properties. And so we may be seeing that too, is that we just haven't gone out in there and have a profile as accurate as we want to. And I think maybe Ian's showing some of that. So yeah, I think that's certainly one of the other points. And then there's also the question of access that Ian has brought up. We briefly looked into kind of some of the profiling issues. What was it? Ian, what was it? Access, topography, and what was the third one that you were talking about?
View. Right. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. So the access, it does look like there is a road that goes in that kind of pushes in through from the east of that lot. The topography, that certainly might be correct, that we have a steep profiling or a hillside profiling when it really should be steep. And then there's also the view that I think Ian has pointed out can be very challenging. And again, we have been working with Ian a little bit on trying to shore up our manual to be a little bit more concise with the language of view. And so that can be very helpful. At the end of the day, we do want to get things right. And we have a lot of properties, and the need for the appeal process, we need the appeal process, meaning property appraisal, just as much as landowners. And every appeal and every opportunity there is to correct if there is any underlying errors or anything. So with respect to transparency, yeah, that's correct. That there was a request, maybe two, that came to our office this last summer. Those requests were, what we did is we followed the protocol that we have in place. That does require us to, at a certain point, if it requires a significant amount of time, we do charge that to that particular property owner. And as you can see, $1,500 is
a bit of a shell shock. I mean, quite frankly, for myself too, to say that's a lot of time. However, the request also, that $1,500 does reflect an extensive data request that goes back multiple years that we just would take a significant amount of time to do. So yeah, there's certainly that, but you could also, have a smaller request where you ask for maybe the current year's data on such and such, and that would be, dollars, if not potentially even free if there's a certain threshold. I see that there's a question too from the chat. I don't know if John, do you want to?
Yeah, we can. I mean, it would let you finish.
Okay.
You want to jump to a question?
Yeah. Ian also kind of is throwing out a formal audit or review of categorizations and adjustments that are being used for values. I think this goes back to us just wanting to get things right. We have limited resources. We would love, in fact, a couple of years ago, I was trying to work with our GIS team to do some type of mass review of slopes themselves. This was, 3 years ago, I think, at this point in time. And that would be a great, kind of example of we're trying to look for things, but we have limited technology and also limited staff and resources to be able to do some of those audits. So at the end of the day, we'd love to continue to hone in and get things correct and welcome something like that. So, then the third point here, to challenge valuations that they don't own. Unfortunately, in the state statute actually requires you to be the owner of record to appeal your property. So that would be kind of a question of that. The final here, fix municipal code. So people appealing valuations can present evidence rebutting these types of mistakes. And Ian, I don't know if you're talking about like other property owners or appealing on behalf of a property owner for that kind of final bullet point. You're also saying currently all evidence must be submitted before the municipality has provided any assessment details. I don't know if that's the entire process. What we do have by code, and maybe this is what you're alluding to, is that the evidence must be submitted 15 days after the appeal deadline. And we actually have that in there, if that's what we're talking about here. We do have that in here because the courts have spoken and said that we must be substantially complete with appeals on or before June 1. The last year or two, we have had a few lingering appeals go past June 1, but we have that process in there because we can't drag things on. The appeal process is a quasi-judicial process. It is formal, but it is a process laid out in code. Historically, what the courts do is they'll give substantial time to be able to turn over every stone of every piece of stone under whatever the case may be. The appeal process is slightly different in that you have to have your evidence in a reasonable fashion, and on top of that, we really need to understand and focus on the heart of the issue. Yes, the property does go under the microscope when we do things and we try to look at everything, but again, we have to be mindful that we only can have a property, spend so much time on each appeal when we have to be complete by June 1. So we do have to kind of move along on these properties as well and have to be concise. So I guess at the end of the day, again, pulling up the yoke, we have been working with Mr. Moore on some of these questions, and I think it has been helping us be a little bit more consistent and a little bit more clear and concise with the public on this stuff. So there has been some really good that's been coming about with this stuff.
All right, thanks, Jack. Let's go ahead, Chris. You had a question?
Yeah, on that last proposal for a code change, I would just ask that the staff prepare a first round draft for us.
Are you looking at bullet 4, Chris?
Yes. Yep, that just seems like low hanging fruit right there. So whatever, it would be nice to come from the assessor's office because they would understand better the parameters and restrictions and timelines, and therefore it could be done in a way that is at the first blush meaningful and functional.
I guess I can quickly respond to that. You know, if we did do something where we extended the evidence for the appeal deadline, I think that would inevitably, and I'm just talking out loud here, thinking out loud, but I think that would inevitably push appeals past that June 1 deadline. So we historically wrote, this is before my time, but we did a extensive rewrite of the appeal process, you know, before my time. And that rewrite of the appeal process was directly because of that court case that we had to be done on or before June 1 for almost all the appeals. And in general, if you look at the appeal process, if you look at the numbers at an aggregate level, by and large, you know, overwhelming majority of the properties do get their appeal deposit back. 90+% this last year. Overwhelming majority of properties don't need to have a board of equalization from going into that as well. So I think there's a lot of success from the appeal process, the way it works now. So I guess ultimately what I'm saying is I would be slightly hesitant to just willfully push that late evidence deadline, knowing that it could jeopardize our constraints.
Right, and so I just would rebut that or reply that here your staff, and I see Ian wants to talk, it would be great, presents an idea that we could fix the code to make this work. I assure you it would be much worse if the assembly took first blush than if your staff tried to figure out a way to make it so that if evidence is available that they didn't have a means to get to because it wasn't provided to them, that they're able to use that evidence in some way and not just have to wait an entire year to present it. So I don't know, I think it probably is better to come from you guys than to come from us.
Sure, and I'll let maybe Ian say something, and then I probably also have maybe a follow-up question, or not follow-up question, additional discussion on late evidence too.
Let's go to Dean real quick. He asked to be in the queue and might be able to address some of this. Dean, go ahead.
Whoops. Thank you. Can you hear me? My computer just glitched. Okay.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So I had a quick question and then a comment, but my quick question was on the Mr. Moore saying the assessor's estimate that it would cost less than $1,500 to make the assessment data available to the public. And I guess my question is, was that, I understood from Mr. Kadamis, that was an estimate just for this one parcel and information on one parcel. So that's not a cost estimate to make the, all of the data of all municipal properties available. That's a different number, isn't it?
I think that's for either Ian or Jack.
Okay, and I'd be happy to respond to that. So that $1,500 estimate was in response to a public information request that a community council made for data for the whole municipality. And that would be for a one-time dump of all these assessment details. that wouldn't be for kind of ongoing transparency, but I think that would be a great initial step just for getting data out there so that we would have transparency and the community councils or the general public could do this type of review and see how widespread these types of problems are. And I guess in response to the other question about that fourth bullet point on municipal code, my point there was that currently the timeline works so that the appellant submits all evidence in the first 2 weeks of the appeal period, and then several months later, the assessor's office provides details which would include these types of profiling details that aren't available anywhere else. But at that point, the appellant has no opportunity to respond to them. And so when the assessor, in this example, presents information saying that the property is valued as being a hillside slope and not a steep slope, or that it has access, whereas there is no access. Those types of issues, the appellant currently has no opportunity to rebut that and present real evidence. And in every other court case, there's a back and forth where when one party presents evidence, there's always an opportunity for the other party to provide truthful evidence in rebuttal. And that isn't currently the case, but I think that would be a great change to municipal code. And thank you, Chris, for that.
Wouldn't extend the deadline.
Yeah, and of course that wouldn't be extending any deadline. That would just be an opportunity at the end after the assessor has provided any details for a rebuttal round of evidence.
Right. Dean, did that help?
Yes, I was going to comment on that part, the request to do a municipal code fix and submitting rebuttal evidence. And I've read the code, and I do see the deadline for submitting the evidence the appellant intends to use in the appeal. I was wondering, though, there's also the Board of Equalization. It describes the Board of Equalization hearings as rather an informal hearing process rather than formal and strict rules of evidence. And the board, the panel that's hearing an appeal, that can admit relevant evidence. And I guess I wondered in practice, and Ian or Jack would maybe know this better than me. I have not been attending Board of Equalization hearings, but it made sense to me what Mr. Moore's saying. But I think it's sort of implied there in code already that the appellant, when they're at the Board of Equalization hearing, they've submitted their evidence in the 15-day timeline, but then they later see the assessor's packets and additional data and all of that that's going to the board. Then at the hearing, wouldn't the appellant be able to introduce some rebuttal evidence? Doesn't the Board of Equalization have that power or authority to say, yes, we're going to admit this rebuttal evidence to the assessor's data now at the hearing, or is it all just completely barred by the 15-day deadline there? And to me, it seems that maybe it's just an interpretation issue, but it would seem to me the board can't allow that. If they decided it was relevant rebuttal evidence, they can admit it at the hearing itself. But in practice, does that what occurs, I guess, to Mr. Gadamis?
Yeah. So through the chair to Mr. Gates. So I guess a couple of things, and the short answer is yes, your interpretation is exactly ours. And so again, let's maybe just take a step back. The 15-day evidence is a very helpful tool for us to, again, we need to process appeals on or before June 1. But I also want to stress here that we do often accept late evidence. If that evidence is going to be helpful to resolve the appeal, we will certainly be we will often accept that late evidence. One of the things that we also do too is we try to look at, has the property owner made a good faith effort? We've had some cases that a property owner, the day or even hours before it goes to a Board of Equalization hearing, they provide a new packet of information to us. And again, if we would get that information, there's no way we could be able to prudently vet and review all that information. Hours before a Board of Equalization hearing would have to be postponed, and then we go down the road to to basically postponing a BOE hearing, even if it's necessary. But again, if it's something that might really be the crux of the issue, we will often accept that late evidence. And I got 2 more points. We also have a Board of Equalization packet in code that's something that we have to give to the Board of Equalization members. We also give it to the property owner as a courtesy as well, just so that they know what's going on. And from that too, we will send that 1 week prior. So there's certainly some time for those property, for the Board of Equalization and the property owners to review everything. And again, this is after we've been working one-on-one with a property owner. And if it is going to the Board of Equalization, we respectfully will be agreeing to disagree with the property owner. And our goal is to not have that Board of Equalization packet be any surprises to the property owner. I mean, and if that's the case, then we failed. And then I guess my final point is going to that Board of Equalization. Typically the format is we have the property owner in the Board of Equalization. The format is the property owner gets about 5 minutes to discuss and present to the Board of Equalization. And then there's 5 minutes that the MOA has, so the appraiser can have 5 minutes to discuss their case. And then there is an additional time to the property owner to rebut anything the assessor said. So there is already a lot of processes in place for a property owner to do any rebutting in the system. And Dean, you have mentioned, and this does happen, that the Board of Equalization does have every power they has their discretion to accept additional evidence or not. What has historically been, what we've seen is that the Board of Equalization, the members will often ask the municipality, the appraiser, what their recommendation is. They don't always have to go with that. Again, they have that power. So there are all of this to say that there is a lot of steps in place that a property owner can submit additional late evidence. Just because we have that 15 days in code doesn't preclude you from different avenues. So hopefully that maybe gives paints a picture of the appeal process a little bit more, and that there are plenty of opportunities right now as the code is.
Okay, Dean, did you have a follow-up?
Well, thank you, Mr. Gadamus. Appreciate that. I had one more comment. It was about the third bullet there on the slide, providing a means for the public to challenge valuations on properties they don't own. And I think Mr. Gadamus is correct that state law wouldn't allow it. I also think that such a change would be a little dangerous, and it would open, I guess, a slippery slope or a floodgate, or open an opportunity for a property owner with the means and financing to do so to file multiple appeals in some strategic way. Anyways, the standing for appealing property valuation is basically a person who's paying taxes. The taxes based on the value, ad valorem taxation, and so to allow appeal of property valuations by someone who doesn't have that standing, to me, is pretty problematic. But I just wanted to point out as well that in our code we have section 120560, that's correction of errors, and I believe that it does allow the assessor to, in subsection B, to correct errors in assessment when the assessor discovers an error or omission has been made in real or personal property assessment or billing. You know, and if they're persuaded that there is an error, they can fix it. They can then assess or reassess or bill or rebill for the whichever property the error applied to. I think this would apply to errors in general assessment methodology for, you know, vacant land or so forth. But this is allowed also at the assessor's discretion, and that discretion is conferred to the assessor by state law, state statute. I mean, chapter 2945 is pretty extensive. I think that the assembly as the legislative body here does have some ability to put some limits on the assessor's discretion, maybe methods of evaluating, valuing vacant land and so forth. I also think that's a risky way to go. Anyways, I just wanted to make sure to point out that the assessor can make changes by a non-property owner for errors on property that they don't own when it's brought to their assessor's attention. So not in the appeal process, but in a more general sense. And, you know, of course, Mr. Kadamis can correct me if I misstated something there.
Well, thanks, Dean. Jack, did you want to address that?
So no, I think he's correct. We do have the correction of errors in assessment, and even the state statute, if you look at the corrections, it does allow the assessor to make that discretionary judgment call, you know, that the assessor may correct the errors, whatever it may be. And so, yeah, we do correction of errors. I mean, we certainly do. I mean, a good example is recently we found out that a property that we had new construction on was on the wrong property, and so that's certainly an error, and we corrected it in favor of the property owner, and so that does happen. It does kick off the process where they then get a new valuation notice, which then kicks off the a new due process rights where they may appeal that new valuation notice. So yeah, I think I'm agreeing with Dean, everything that he's interpreting there. I don't have any concerns of what he's saying. Right.
All right, thanks. Ian, I see your hand up.
I'm sorry, I think I had forgotten to take it down. But I just, while I have the floor here, I just want to reiterate that on a couple of these points, that the last bullet point about the change to municipal code, again, that wouldn't be anything to do with the deadline for the initial presentation of evidence, but it would just be a means to ensure that the appellant had an opportunity to present factual evidence that was rebutting claims from the assessor. And as was pointed out in the code, there's some ambiguity where the Board of Equalization has the ability to decide whether they will accept late evidence. And so this would be any evidence presented after that first 15 days. And in my personal experience, that often the board declines that additional information. And so that's just a total discretionary item. On the previous bullet point about the means to challenge valuations, I agree that this is a really hard issue. The biggest point here is that when one property is undervalued, that has a direct impact on every other property owner in Anchorage. And so if the assessor mistakenly or intentionally undervalues the property, that means that to achieve the same tax base, every other property value is assessed at a higher mill rate. And so there is real impact to people for incorrect valuations of properties that they don't own. But yeah, thanks again for this discussion. I think this is great. And again, on that first point, it seems like that's the easy no-brainer is that here in this meeting, we've undoubtedly spent more than $1,500 of mutual time and money, and that for that small cost, we could do a one-time presentation of this information and make it public so that community councils could have the ability to do this type of review. Thanks again.
Thanks, Ian. Are there any questions from the committee? I don't see anything in the queue. I had a couple. So I wondered, Jack, if if someone files an appeal, is it possible at that point for the assessor to provide just all the data that went into valuation of that property? It's just at that point, and then the appellant would have more information and something concrete to respond to.
Yeah, you're correct. I think historically our past practice is we don't just give all of the information, especially like land features, to the property owner. And I think what we've learned over the last year or so, couple of years, is that can be very beneficial to kind of walk through some of that. So we're working on that. Again, we're really excited about being able to have more of the, specifically land attributes be available also online. But at the end of the day, when we were working appeals, we often tried to focus on the crux of the issue. And so opening it up sometimes to everything could potentially be time intensive, but also potentially even confusing for everyone. It might not give us the resolution that we're looking for, whatever that may be. So again, we are trying to work with that a little bit more, really try to show that. But you're absolutely right. Once you don't even have to appeal your property to get all of that information of your property profile either. So that's also something to keep in mind.
Okay, so you don't have to. So I could say, give me everything you use to value my property now, and would that be readily available without cost?
Yeah, I mean, giving everything that was used to value my property is a kind of great question. But if you say something like, can I have the profile of my property for everything on it, including, what land, the site data, etc., we could give that to you. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, and then, as far as that time limit, where you'd miss June 1, if there were a case where someone appeals and it just has to be done by June 1 and they may be dissatisfied at the end, but it's done. But if it's a complex issue, I mean, can they continue outside of that appeal window after June 1 so that at least for the next year, it would be correct?
Yeah, so, and then it's a good question, and that's what I was alluding to is, the court said substantially complete. So we have had in the last couple of years appeals go past June 1 for a couple of reasons. But yeah, if we have a complex appeal, that can go past June 1. And in fact, we've had some that went past July and even into August.
Okay. And is that Board of Equalization, you keep a few of them active for a while?
Yeah, and that's the other challenge too, is, as the time moves on too, it's harder and harder to have the board members stay on for the year. So, and we're always, as I'm sure you know, and some of the other assembly members, we're always hurting for finding Board of Equalization members.
Some of us work at every community council meeting.
Yeah.
So, okay. But I think moving forward, then Ian's kind of presented some things here. So on this first one now, we did kind of on the big data link on the website. I know some of this stuff is available, and I had pulled it a few years ago and had all the data. And I think that was not just housing; it had all the criteria for valuing piece of property. And that's not available now.
And well, so one, that we still have open data, and so you can go online and pull a lot of information, but unfortunately it does not have the land attributes, just given our current constraints in our system. So what Ian's asking for, or what this is alluding to, is several things, but one is to try to get all that land profiling. But as I recall, I can't remember exactly what this request, but as I recall, this request was asking for extensive documentation that would be a manual process of extracting information and entering into spreadsheets from CAMA into something else, and we just don't have a systematic, easy way to pull that out, so to speak. So hence the kind of eye-watering price there, going back multiple years and everything else. It was a fairly extensive data request, but we do get data requests, and we if it some of those requests can be just a simple query, and we can try to get that in a reasonable fashion that could be dollars or even free.
Okay, so at some point you're going to take that data, get it in some form so it can go into the new system. So I mean, so how do you do that then if it's not really accessible?
Yeah, I think that a lot of that's behind the scenes that surpasses my ability to understand the data, but starts to get into programming language, so to speak, that goes in. So it's beyond my technical understanding, and I'd say that we have had significant challenges with the data conversion, where we're pulling the data from the legacy into the new system. And that's a tremendous amount of effort, and I don't think we could just pull out a little extract from that and turn it into something meaningful that we all know and understand with a spreadsheet data, so to speak. I think there's a lot of IT technical work behind that. If I think that's the question that you're asking.
Yeah, so at some point, so when the new system is in there, will people be able to go back and look at the history of some of those things? And I'm thinking about the examples that you sent me. You could hit a link and it would show the assessed value over multiple years, but I guess the slope and things like that wouldn't change. So you're going to over years, so you would just have one value in there. Somehow you'll get that in there.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, for as far as like a website goes, so to speak. I mean, we'll be able to, moving forward, have a history, moving forward of the values. I don't know if we'll have a history of all of the attributes for everything, going back multiple years, for example. We may have that. I think we have that capability internally, but I don't know if that would be able to get pushed onto a website for the public to readily say, what was my land profile or my house profile, 7 years ago or something. So there's a lot for us to still discover with this new system as well, and I can't, speak for everything.
Okay, like in some of those that you could look and see open permits. You could even track, so you
Yeah.
can see some homes I looked at were like 100 years old, and it would show, permit, and you could see a little bit. Oh, it was remodeled 40 years ago. It was remodeled 10 years ago, and value, and you can see the valuation jump after each of those. So you could tie those together. Would you expect to be able to do something like that?
Yeah, I think we will hopefully be able to have the permitting. That's a little bit more of a tangible, simple data set than kind of like by tax year. So it all depends, but I'll be hopeful that we could do something very similar to that.
Okay.
But again, looking at some of the websites and looking at from the perspective of like, if I want to answer the question, what was my exact property profile? I'm a member of the public, for example, saying, I want to know the exact profile of my property was 7 years ago. Everything. I want to know the square footage. I want to know, everything there. I don't know if we will or will not be able to do that entirely. That's starting to get to some huge data. When you start to add in multiple years.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So I guess we don't have clarity. We should continue this discussion on how to get the data available to everyone somehow, but you're saying that land data is not there. Maybe we give that some thought. We can talk more about that at some point. We're going to have to wrap up today. And then the issue code on appealing, either Jack or Dean look at that and say if there's some ambiguity on, what data that the Board of Equalization can look at, is think about how to clear that ambiguity up. And Ian, go ahead. I see your hand up.
Yeah, I guess I just want to reiterate that my understanding is that if the assembly authorized $1,500 one time, that this data could be made available as a one-time dump. I think that's what Jack's told us. And so it seems like that might be a really easy first step, is just the authorization of $1,500 of staff time to provide a one-time dump of data to be available to the community councils.
Jack, you might, after this meeting, give some thought to what it would take to do that. I mean, we are in budget time, and maybe can give you a special funding just for that task. And I think if you can come up with some reasonable way to pay for that with whatever staff issues it would take, I'd certainly consider that as an amendment to the budget coming up.
Yeah, I would say also too, it could be helpful to understand what that request is looking at, and maybe change that request slightly to something that's a lot more I would say obtainable from given our constraints too. And so if the goal is to maybe take a look at everything, you could just look at maybe the current year instead of looking at going back multiple years. That going back multiple years can add enormous complexity and time to do that. So yeah, and the other thing too is we are definitely we're definitely at a peak capacity right now with trying to wrap up 2022 tax year, in addition to being in the CAMA system. So there certainly is limited resources at this point in time as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's fine. Let's continue this a little bit later. And I think maybe I'll give a call to IT and maybe Brennan Babb and see what maybe he's got some insights into that. But we've got a little bit of time to deal with that. Crystal, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. First I want to say thanks to Ian and certainly to Jack too, just for all the information here. I have found this whole, all of this information to be a lot more helpful just in terms of understanding more about the whole process. So thank you very much to both of you. But I guess one of the concerns I have is one of the things that Jack was talking about in terms of the appeal process. I think there are a lot of nuances to that process that aren't necessarily in code. They've just become their best practices. So what I guess I would be interested in having a conversation about is what particular parts of that process are not necessarily in code, but probably should be when Jack's not there anymore. So that was, something that I wouldn't mind having a little more conversation on, because it seems like there are certain things that obviously are in code and those will be followed no matter what, but there are just a few other things that I think mentioned that said, well, yeah, we typically do this, or we'll always allow that, but that may not necessarily be in code. So, I like I said, I'd be interested in seeing if we couldn't maybe fix code to the degree where we can have some of those best practices actually included. So just my comment there. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And John, we're not hearing you, so you might be muted still.
I was muted. Thank you, Crystal. We're getting near our end of time, so I'm going to read a few things that are in the chat here just to get them in the record. So is it Mr. Tongi? How do you pronounce that?
Tanji, sir. T-O-N-G-E, it's Tanji.
Tanji, okay, I'll just read it. So Mr. Tanji said that he would highlight the limited staff with our other obligations. So I presume that you work for the assessor's office. Thanks for being here today. And then Chris Constant.
John, I'm back.
Oh, you're back. Okay, go ahead. We have a few minutes.
Thank you. Kiana, would you go ahead and pop up the draft AO that I am intending to introduce? Members should be receiving this in their email soon, and it's up on the website. We have had some discussions over the past 6 months about what the state law change has been on, or the state regulatory change has been on quantums of cannabis, THC in cannabis products. The state has moved from 50 to 100 milligrams per package, which has been implemented across the state except in Anchorage. And our manufacturers are struggling because they're unable to compete in the market statewide now, and our retailers are also being shut out of being able to sell a more streamlined product. I know there were some concerns and questions about what the ramifications of going from 50 to 100 per package means, and so I am introducing this item on the addendum tomorrow. We can come together and have a conversation about it over the next couple of weeks, but I wanted to make sure it was previewed here.
Okay, we have brief moments. Would you want to just highlight the changes in it? It is some, so you'll put it for introduction. We'll have another meeting before we would vote on this. Do you want to just add it to that agenda?
We can, and that we can for sure, and we can just briefly discuss it now. What I am intending to do here is, instead of have a specific number in our code, to pin it to the state regulatory number. So if the state decides it's too much, then they can reduce, although they haven't had any problems statewide since implementing. And if the state, we can always come back and reduce it if we find we have a problem. But practically speaking, it's weird to have our code out of alignment on the state with the state on this item. And so I'm just simply attempting to comport our code to the state's requirements. You can see the language there. It's pretty straightforward. Instead of having an individual packaged edible marijuana, packaged edible retail marijuana product is determined to have more than 50 milligrams. It's a single serving of the marijuana product or single package unit of edible marijuana contains a level of THC that exceeds the potency levels established in the state code there, the administrative code. So that's what it is, and we can meet again in 2 weeks.
Okay, thanks. Pete, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And yeah, we've looked at other states and our statewide edible maximums were significantly less than what other states had set up, and now the state has changed theirs, and so we're basically the only jurisdiction in the state that hasn't already switched, so that we would be following the state's new code. And so I think this is a good idea, and it's time that we actually made this change. So thanks, Chris. Thanks, John.
All right, thanks, Pete. Dean, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to describe the language really briefly, where you see that it's, sorry, I need to pull up my draft that's a little larger. So I just wanted to note that this new sentence that's replacing the old one, it's sort of got two parts: a single serving of a marijuana product, and then the second part, or a single packaged unit of an edible marijuana product. I just wanted to point out that those two track the state regulation. We don't have that comparable state regulation in our code. We structured it a little differently, that's described in the whereas. But the state regulation it refers to has subsections 1 and 2. And so those two different serving, single serving, and the packaged unit are like subparagraphs 1 and 2. So they're just combined there to sort of very closely track the language of the state regulation and how it's structured for those potency limits. And I also just wanted to point out that this doesn't change, and the state hasn't changed, the maximum amount that you could sell to an individual in one day, and those other limits that are still in place. So, thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Dean. Felix, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a couple things. First, and maybe Mr. Peterson answered this question already, but it would be good just to get a better understanding, more in-depth understanding rather, of why the state changed, decided to change from 5 to 10, and sort of just generally why nationwide that has been a trend, and just get a better understanding of some of the public safety dynamics, because I know anytime that you talk edibles, that tends to be a discussion topic. And then I also was curious, and I know we don't have time probably to answer either of these points today, but does this change in code in any way impact our on-site regulations? And I know that's a little bit of a ridiculous question because no one uses our on-site regulations anyway, but I'd like to know that regardless. Thanks.
I guess I'll briefly answer first the second part. It doesn't impact the on-site regulations. It's still got a maximum amount you can sell to an individual for on-site consumption, and the state didn't change that, and we're not changing ours. I think it was 10. And so here, I guess the effect is instead of having 2 servings of 5 milligrams each, someone who's consuming on site can consume 1 serving of 10 milligrams. So it's still the maximum amount it can sell to someone for consumption on site. And then the first part of your question, the reasons why and all of that, I think that other people could speak to that a lot better than I could. I'm not sure, but I think it's more a result of the whole industry of marijuana sales and regulation being new. They started conservatively with lower levels, and now with years of experience behind the belt, I guess the trend is to give it a more standardized safe level, and I'm not really sure that.
And if I might just briefly answer as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. It's simply that it's become an industry standard across the country, and the state of Alaska recognized and investigated this question, and through their process of public outreach and hearing from members of the public and the community and the industry, they opted to follow this national trend. And so we just, as Alaska was highly conservative in their packaging, up until the state made the change. We now are probably one of the most restrictive areas in the country, markets in the country, and even more so than people, 40 miles away from here. But I do anticipate, to your point about the public safety dynamics, that we'll hear from APD and we'll hear the standard message: don't do this, cannabis is bad, it's trouble, drunk driving, etc. We've heard it, we'll hear it again, and the industry continues to be a good player. So I hope we follow the trends of the country and the state in this conversation.
Great, thanks, Chris. Crystal, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, and that's exactly the point that I wanted to bring up, is that, we have heard from a public safety and a public health standpoint. We've had a policy statement opposing it from the Anchorage Health Department. We've had APD respond and say that they don't think it's a good idea. And even our own legal department said that, they have seen an increase in DUI cases just because of just the existence of marijuana in general. And so we know that it will have impacts. I think it was unfair to say that the state hasn't had any problems yet. They only implemented that, I believe it was the 1st of September. So there's really not any real data yet to show what kind of impacts it's going to have. But, I think it puts us in an awkward position when locations around the municipality have a different standard. So I certainly understand that hiccup there. But I don't believe that it's a good change. I don't think that wisdom would actually say that this is the right way to go. However, I think we're going to be in an awkward position. So I will probably oppose it. I certainly don't want to see it go as a recommendation from this committee, but if we vote on it at that point, I'll make that statement. But anyway, just want to make sure that everybody is aware of the fact that there probably are public health and public safety implications here that I hope we won't just completely ignore. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thanks, Crystal. Chris, one more. You there, Chris? Oh, we need to extend the time.
Thank you. I would move to extend by 5 minutes so we can have public testimony.
Any opposition? Hearing none, extend by 5 minutes.
Thanks.
Did you have a question, Chris, or do you want to move on?
I respect the fears the public has brought forward on the conversation about public health and police and public safety and all of that. And I would just offer that those arguments have been made my entire life. And the trend is the other way. The trend is towards allowing people the freedom to choose. And we just need to ensure that the policies we make are causing a little harm. And if we do identify harms, we fix that. And we will always have the ability to change this if we need to. But again, we're not here to debate. I'm just here to tell you it's being introduced. And we'll have this conversation over the next couple of weeks. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, well, I think it's a wrap on those issues. We have a few minutes for public comment. If there's anyone who'd like to speak, I think they're on the phone at *6 and state your name. Going once, going twice. No public comment. Move to adjourn.
So moved. Thank you.
To adjourn.
All right, thanks everyone.
See you at 11.
Thanks, Ian and Jack.